So while you were away at coffee break, I added some particular features. The first thing I did was in the body tag, I gave it an ID, so I added an attribute, and the single quotes, as I mentioned, are things that I internally use for attributes inside of HTML.
Mm-hmm. We'll turn audio. Yep.
So I added the ID tag to the body tag. That's going to give me access to the body tag, and basically it's going to give me access to space here. So an HTML comment, for example, has this format. So that's what comments look like in HTML. So in this particular case, what we're doing is we're this first line here is essentially going to set up a variable. It's going to use this special function call, document get element by ID, and it's going to reference the attribute of the body tag. So what it's going to give me is that variable is going to hold a handle to a model of the document in the browser. So it's going to reference this particular element. So that way there, when I set up a function, so I created this new function called fnlog_1. It takes a single parameter, fi message, and then it basically grabs the content of the body, assigns it to a variable, adds my message to that variable. So essentially it appends the message and then this br tag, and then it essentially assigns that to the body of the document. So in effect what's going to happen is that the actually technically the content of the body is going to end up after the script tag. It's going to end up right down here. So essentially if I look at the structure of the document as it's created in memory, then whatever parameter I pass to the log is going to embed itself in the body of the document. So if I go to here and I refresh the page, it's going to show, it already showed because I just tested it. So this is essentially a way of getting a diagnostics output to the screen without requiring the browser to have any diagnostics functionality.
Oh, okay, to test it on the browser without...
To test it out on the browser without having the browser need that develop panel.
That developer
so it'll work on your browser in theory. So what we'll do is let me mail this to you, and you can cut and paste it into into your thing. Save it with, well, let me actually get the new line version. My browser will handle, my system will handle either Unix or Windows formats, so I have to tell it specifically that I want it to be that way. Actually, I'm just going to send you the whole thing as straight up text. Gmail or iCloud? Which?
Gmail. Yeah, iCloud's automatically built in because.
Okay, so I just sent you an email with the file that I'm editing. It's essentially the same as this one. So basically open up that email, select its entire body. Should be just the
copy.
Yeah, copy it, paste it there.
Nice.
Let me just have a peek at it, make sure it's the same. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so save that and give it its name. I think I'm calling it sample_1.htm. I don't know. You can save it as if you want.
Okay. So sample
one.
_1.html.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between HTML and HTML in terms of
Not
file
really.
format?
It should be the same. You can do HTML.
Okay, kind of like doc and docx.
Yeah, it should be the same.
Okay. I just gotta see where it's locally stored.
Yeah. So I created a directory. It was basically your name, just in some convenient place.
Clear symbols. Oh, can find the symbols. That's the find. That is. Oh, that's it. Oh, so it's built in.
You should just run it. Yeah.
Oh, they let you see it here. Okay, that's to run it, I guess.
Well, I guess so, but it's not the best way to do it. Is save it to a file system, so then you can invoke it through whatever your file explorer is.
Preview in Safari.
Yeah, that's the one you want right there.
Okay.
So if you edit the file,
Mm-hmm.
you can change all of the stuff that it's doing. I don't know why this tab doesn't belong to me. That's something else. You open up a bunch of tabs. You don't have to kill all your tabs.
Well, my rules, I don't to have the tabs up unless I'm actually using them. Otherwise, I have this mess of tabs.
And you also have a lot of memory.
I close the tabs when I'm done.
Yeah, a lot of memory consumed. Okay, so at this point, we've just shown you how to use a text editor to create
on an iPad.
On an iPad, yep. So so what we just did is
2018. Hello.
We just figured out a way to get around the fact that they don't have an easy way to see what the console is going to show you. So now. So here is this program, and basically I'm going to be working in the space under this long line because I just want to keep the log function as it is. So we've set up this context, and it's mostly going to do what we want to do. So the first thing that you'll notice is that we can define variables inside of functions, and that the definition of a function is just like a definition of a variable. Right? So I should be able to define.
It's like sine versus cosine, they're all different functions, and then x can represent different things. x1, x2, x3, y1, y2, z.
Okay, so what happens if I do. So I have this inside function. Okay? And.
Is there a reason you call it FUNC versus FN?
Well, I did the FN as a prefix. I mean, just call it inside.
Okay. Oh, you're choosing to name it inside functions because it's easy to remember.
Yep.
Got it.
Okay, so what's going to happen now?
This is function. Calling function.
This is actually a trick question, but you need to. I mean, this is basically a test of understanding.
So if the example 2 is represented by hello, the variable is represented by hello San Diego, then the function inside is represented as the function, which then refers to simplest one.
Okay, so
function example turn function inside 2.
Remember, this is a trick question. The program works, but it'll do something. It'll do something that is, at this particular point, actually wrong. But we can fix it. So I'm wondering whether or not you've noticed what's happening.
Well, there's 2 returns here. This return is for, F example 2. There's something wrong with the 2 things at the bottom.
Which 2 things? So which line should I be on? Tell me how much I need to go up.
Return function inside 2. That'll return hello San Diego?
No.
No.
This is what we're doing right now is something called higher order function. So let's walk through this, okay? Because you want to understand it in terms of the sequence, okay? So the program basically gets to here. It sets up a variable ML test. Remember this. Then it sets up a function which does everything between these outer curly braces from there to there, right? So essentially, it'll do everything that's in the highlighted section, but only later. It's just defining it for now. It's saying I've set it up so that I can call it.
It defines it, but it runs it later in order.
Right. So basically, it doesn't run it until it gets to this line. Okay. When it gets to this line, it's going to go up here. It'll print out the value of ML test 1. Then it'll define a value for example 2. Then it'll define another value, which is fn inside 2, which happens to be a function.
Returning
and then it'll return the function.
So in other words, return hello San Diego twice?
Nope. It's going to return this definition because this is a definition.
Oh, because there's a bracket. Oh, okay, the bracket.
It's a definition. This is a function definition, right?
Oh, okay, so there's every time there's a bracket, it's defining it, but doesn't run it till the very bottom.
It's this keyword here that essentially sets it up as a function, and it won't call that function. It won't actually run the stuff inside
until you say function, brackets at the bottom, right?
Well, this is what I need to do in order to call the function. I need somewhere to have something that's roughly the equivalent of that. Right? Okay. So you see that's essentially a function call. So if I set it up this way, so I just added that line, right? So that line just changed the behavior. So basically it's going to go here, it's going to do this one, it's going to skip to here, then it's going to jump back to this one, then do this, define, then it's going to call, it's going to basically create the value of example 2, it's going to return it. Now this is equal to the value of example 2. So what this did is it just became as if
hello San Diego there.
I had there. But that's not a function call, that's just a string. It's a string, doesn't do anything. It just sits there. There's nothing, this isn't fn log, right? If I had this wrapping the string, then it would treat it as a parameter to the call. So now the call happens to be fn log after the call inside 2. Now this would print, right? But this won't print anything because all it's going to do is generate, whoops, right? So this hello world or hello San Diego is just a string, just much the same way that this string is sitting up there.
String is items separated by commas?
Every line is separated by a comma, or is essentially, if there's not a semicolon at the end of the line, it's going to basically be followed by curly braces. So it's going to look for the curly brace scope. So that's essentially all part of the same package that's associated with this line here, right? So in effect, what we're saying is that this inside 2 may be executing, but it's not going to do anything because it's returning a string. So I'll end up with a string in place of where the function is. Okay. Right. So that's not what's happening. What's happening is that it's defining this function. So basically, this gets assigned to this variable, and then now I'm returning the function. I'm returning the definition. So what am I going to end up with here? I'm going to end up with, effectively, the definition. So the definition is going to get assigned to this, and then I'm going to try to create a log of a function definition. So what's it going to print? It's going to print the function definition. It's not going to print.
Not actually run the function.
It's not going to run the function, right?
It's going to print the definition of the function. I don't know. Write the actual function. Okay.
Yep. Look at that. It's not what we expected, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in order to get it to actually run this function, right? Now keep in mind that ml obtained val is a function, so I could call it. Okay. But if I call it, what's it going to do? It's going to take this string, it's going to return it, and this thing is effectively going to be equal to this string as if I had just done that, right? But that's not going to do anything. Instead, I could capture it into a variable, right? And I should suffix that, okay? And then if I print that value, right, now what's going to happen?
So ml new value 1. Now you're going to print that value in this. So So it'll print out the definition of the function?
Nope,
No,
not
because
this
now you're
time.
representing it as a variable.
So
You're calling it.
I'm calling it, then I get the value of it when it's evaluated, which in this case is the inside function. The inside function is going to create a return value.
Yeah.
But the return value is this, and then I'm going to log that.
So the return value
Gets assigned to ML new var, and new var gets handed off to log, which is a call which is going to add it to, it's going to append it to the screen.
Okay.
Do you see this,
Yeah.
or is this something you're just
A
accepting
little bit.
because I'm telling you?
So basically, this is defining ML new val as a variable,
Right.
and you'll be calling it as ML obtained value 1.
So it's going
When you put a semicolon, you're calling it, right?
when I put the parens, you see there's a two parens
Parentheses.
right next together?
Mm-hmm.
That's a call.
Calling. What does calling? What's the exact definition of calling mean?
So it's basically saying I've created a recipe.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually doing the recipe. So in other words, if I have the recipe, it's sitting on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
That recipe can sitting on a piece of paper in a book for ages, right?
Yeah.
But at some point or another, I'm going to say to the cook, make that recipe, do that recipe. So what he's going to do is he's going to pick up that piece of paper and he's going to read the first line, he's going to do that instruction. He's going to read the next line, he's going to do that instruction. So calling is essentially instructing the cook to perform that.
On that task.
Do that one, right?
Execute that task.
Right, because if we treat writing out a recipe like I can take the recipe and I can write it out, like I can have a book and I can copy the recipe out and I'll end up with a piece of paper that has a recipe on it. That's a definition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? A definition is a piece of paper with a definite recipe on it.
It's a strategy, but calling it is actual tactile execution of the recipe.
Actual execution.
Okay.
So, and so we signal the creation of a function, of a definition of a function with this keyword, function, and then the things that are inside of the two parens, you see the two parens?
Yeah.
Those are going to be the parameters to the call.
And the parameters represent the different variables?
They represent variables that are essentially handed off to that function at the time of calling. So for instance, let's say I have an instruction called jump.
Uh-huh.
A parameter could be how high.
How high? Oh, like the requirements around it. Okay.
Yeah, so you might be able to specify
like how high, how long,
which direction,
which direction,
right? Do you want to jump green or blue?
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's tiles on the floor, you can specify how you want that instruction to be modified by those parameters. So the parameters represent things. And so in effect what you're doing is you're saying, okay, at the time that I'm making the call, I'm specifying specifics about how I want that call to be performed.
Okay, so one of those, the variable is the simplest function 1. Function, you're calling the function with the two parentheses, and anything inside are the parameters. And the parameters represent because of the different boundaries when it comes to that function.
So rather than doing numbers, rather than doing strings, let's do numbers. Let's actually switch to math, because that's going to be, in some respects, a little more obvious what's happening. Okay, so and so let's actually do something that requires some math functions. So for instance, we can say, okay, I want to multiply, and I'm going to just take that out. Just call it
X times Y. Okay, X1.
Okay, so when I call simplest, I can give it a value. I can basically tell it how much I want it to do something. So what's going to happen here is ML test is going to get the value of 12. When I call simplest, it's going to call simplest with the value of ML test,
Just 12.
which is 12. So my first parameter here, it's as if I'm creating a new variable. It's as if I had a keyword here, var.